special meeting of the Board of Education for the School District of Airwood to order for Monday, May the 1st, 2017 with roll call. First of all, I want to note Mr. Cummings and Mr. Heilman have decided to recuse themselves from the discussion and any possible action by the board tonight. So Mr. Cummings is not with us and Mr. Heilman is not sitting with the board at the table. With that roll call, Mr. Coleman.
Here.
Mr. McNevin.
Here.
Mr. Meering.
Here.
Ms. Riley.
Here.
And Bodak here. Is there anyone here for public viewpoints? Any public viewpoints? Any public viewpoints? Hearing none. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Lewison.
All right, so can we get Mr. Baxter online for us? And before I start, so we'll get him. Mr. Baxter's driving back from St. Louis right now, so he's pulling over to take our call.
This is the right James.
Yeah, that is it. Yep.
That's him.
I can hear cars in the
Hi,
back.
Jim.
Hi, can you see me?
Yeah.
No? Well, we can see a
We
picture.
have your
of
profile
Picture.
picture. Yeah.
I see George Clooney.
Here we go.
I guess he can hear us.
There
you
he
go.
is.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, now we can see you. Nothing better
George
than
Clooney.
No, it's Bella.
Thanks for joining us, Jim. I'm going to get started for everybody here. Well, thanks for calling the special meeting to discuss the health insurance renewal. In all my years of doing this, it's the first time we've done this, so I think that means we're making progress in our discussions. So, just recapping, back when we met as a personnel committee, and Kevin and Sean and Mo were at that meeting, we discussed moving to a more creative solution from where we've been. Since that time, Jim did a presentation to the staff. Did everybody watch that? Take
Yes.
the hour that took or
Yeah.
thereabouts to
Hour
watch that?
16.
Okay. And so hopefully that introduced the program to you as like the staff would hear it. And quite honestly, I expected to have some staff here. The biggest pushback I think we felt at that meeting was the fact that we had talked about removing the point of service as an option to the staff. I think if that wasn't done, there probably would have been very few questions or less questions than what we had. Jim and Sarah and I talked on the way out and felt like we should talk to Dean about bringing that option back. I did that on Tuesday. It's in your, under option 3, you'll see what the rate structure looks like on there, and what the staff would pay for out of their employee contribution, that sort of stuff, and that'll take away that concern that people are gonna lose access. The fold-out, just so everybody is aware of what I did, the fold-out is a comparison of your current plan design, which is option 1. That's a non-starter. The personnel committee said we do not want to renew with a 200, 400. I just laid it in there. Bob pointed out, ignore my employee contributions at the bottom because there's some errors in there when I did some copying and pasting of some stuff. But it kind of gives you an outline of what the current plan is and what the renewal plan was with option 1. Option two is simply going to a 250, 500 deductible with a 500,000 max out of pocket, and that's how we got to the 1.8. Option 3 is the introduction of Mr. Baxter and Mr. Marking, who came up with the concept to provide a gap plan for us that would take us on a longer path, a longer journey under option 3. So most of my time wants to be spent talking about option 3. In essence, what we're recommending to you based on the conversation that Jim introduced via presentation in person and or via video is that we move the current employees and retirees, not age 65, to a high deductible plan as presented in option 3. And then we'd add an insurance company through IVS and Jim's company as a third-party administrator to administer those claims to cover the gap between 7150 and the single and 200 what the employee out of pocket is. And Jim's company would do that and then allow us to also start diving into the claim stuff that he talked about.
What is the name of that company?
Jim, what's the name of the company again? I think it's in there.
Secure Enroll?
No, American Public Life
Oh, sorry. American
is
Public Life.
the insurance company. It's in this sheet, Mo.
Okay.
It's listed in there under the half gallon of milk concept.
Oh, I'd like to have.
Secure Enroll is the administrator of this?
Yeah, that's Jim's company.
That's your company.
Yep,
Okay.
But they're not the insurance.
they're not an insurance company, no. Neither is IBS and neither are we. We're
Sure.
brokers
Yeah.
and the Jim's a third-party administrator.
Yeah.
Jim, is there anything you want to add before we let him fire away with questions?
The only thing I wanted to add was I think this idea of the POS option. The only objection that I could really see unresolvable in that room was the idea of pulling away doctors that people have become accustomed to, and that's where I think the POS option as an exhibit there at least deals with that objection. So I think strategically it was good that you were able to get that.
So those questions that we saw on the video, that is, employees anxious to keep, employees who currently or would like to choose the POS because of specific doctors, and if that doctor is not part of Dean's plan, then
Nothing changes from where they're at today if we do option 3 as presented.
but their concern was that there are some doctors that they currently see that they will.
Right, and we brought that back. That's why you see the HMO and the point of service option. So the
Okay.
employees that are on the point of service that want to stay there today still will have the option to do so.
Got it.
And those employees that decide to make that decision to stay with the POS pay for that incremental cost above the HMO.
Right.
So there's no cost to the district at all?
Right.
No additional cost?
No additional
Additional
costs.
costs.
One of the reasons, I mean, remember we did this was to try to get the best price possible we could have out of Dean. And, you know, the way that the budget's been presented and stuff. And so, you know, they'd given us our best price, and I said, if you want to offer the point, we'd like you to offer the point of service, and if you have to add a couple bucks back on there to do so, at least we're giving them accessibility to that. And that's in essence what they did.
That's great. You know, from watching that video, that seemed like the only
Right,
fly in the ointment.
Yep. Yep.
Well, I mean, for observation, we've been trying to solve this for 7 years and had no luck. It's constantly take whatever increase they're gonna give us and chip away at the benefit just to make it somewhat budget neutral. And it's a downhill slide. It has been, and it's been in industry for 20, 30 years. We've fought that and lost. Until you break the cycle and do something different, it's never gonna change. Every year is gonna be a very exasperating conversation, both with the insurer and the employees, and it has nothing to do with us. And it's just what we're stuck with. And I guess what I like about this is it gives us an opportunity to take control of the information and do something with it.
Can you talk a little bit about the information and the fact that we have none now, they won't provide anything to us, and what hopefully a couple of years down the road as we're able to compile information, or not the district, but we can have the availability to access information to try to improve the pool of employees and what plan they're on. Just touch on that a little bit for the rest of the board, if you would.
Absolutely. I had actually commented in the course of that video that where I'm coming from right now is in Southern Illinois, and what we're working with right now is this deployment of a indexed pricing, which basically says that 65% of every hospital's revenue comes from Medicare, and to understand that differential between what Medicare gets billed from the same doctor and hospital for the same procedure is $1. What you're getting billed is typically somewhere in the range of about $2.50 is kind of the norm. So if you can imagine that the very same service that they're happy to take 65% of their revenue on, they're making 2.5 times that amount when they bill an employer plan. So having the ability to see where your patients are spending their dollars, what is the current network discount, which is not actually the long-term solution that makes the most sense, but what it does establish is what is the price that the providers have already agreed to, and in negotiations of any sort, if you could count the cards on the other side of the table to know, we already know that they've agreed to this amount inside of Dean Care. And the premise of your rich benefit is we're saying you should be getting Dean Care discount plus due to the fact that there's very little chase down. And just in the short period of time that we've been on this, we've already developed robots which are on a voluntary basis by the employees. Again, it's their HIPAA data, but what they agree to is share that data for the convenience of themselves. That allows us to assemble all of the provider dollars in a matrix to identify where is the money being spent today, what kind of discounts are being arrived at. And the number one reason we don't have any alternative on the table that's a fully insured carrier is because no one else has control of discounts in your community except for Dean Care. That the very network alternative to Dean Care would have you paying even more than what Dean Care is paying, which is why no carrier competition exists there. And this is exactly the same motif that we see everywhere where in Southern Illinois, where it's rural, where you have a domination by one carrier. Blue Cross Blue Shield dominates in the northern half of Illinois, but the hospitals basically get away with charging more. And when you are co-owned by the insurance carrier as a provider, I would tell you that it creates a very interesting dynamic, because even to look at what they're billing when they talk about what they're losing, if you're making money out of both pockets, it's going to be something where taking it down to the procedure and diagnosis code level is the only way for us to really establish what can we ultimately expect Medicare would reprice at, and then add to that probably a 50 to 60% margin for the hospital. What we're able to forecast very quickly is what would the world price like if you weren't under the thumb of a monopoly carrier, and how would you ever invite competition into that area except for being able to clear the road with real data about the group and real information about what kind of discounts can be arrived at the point where you could recreate your own private network, which is not really difficult. Quite honestly, it's happening in throughout Southern Illinois and everywhere else that we're at, is the opportunity to bring bluntly probably 50 different carriers to the table, where today this idea of refuse to quote is only because they have no runway to land on in Baraboo, Wisconsin, with any relevant network discount. And that's the missing ingredient at your table, is controlling your own direct provider relationship. And that can only happen by getting the metrics in the first year. So ultimately, what really is financing this? Part of it is the excessive profit of the carrier. Part of it is the willingness of reinsurers to say, if you could plow the road for us, we'll subsidize the build out here in order to get basically built on the backs of municipal, public sector, and school districts, is the smartest way for reinsurers to want to build an alternative. And that's because they can be more competitive, because your plan is so rich that providers will work for less to treat patients with a $200 deductible 100%, and that's just math. So that's what we have already developed, the engine to capture the data, the part where the employee is either going to allow it automatically or by providing their EOB on a manual basis. There's no logic why they would not just allow it to be automatic. Either way, we get the information. And with the introduction of the POS, I'm actually very pleased to say that we not only get HMO discount information, now we also get PPO or POS information, which becomes even more of a strong case for the ability to expand choices for your patients while driving down costs at the same time. So that's basically the year one premise, and frankly, that's really something in the first quarter that happens, because when employees allow this on a voluntary basis, we're picking up backwards at least 1.5 to 2 years worth of data, and that means that this is very much a fast track in terms of getting conversations started for next year to have real options out there.
Jim, you did a robot on my account, right?
Correct. Yeah.
That's how you got everything started with like the mechanics. So I gave Jim access to my data, so that he was able to start building those robots off of my stuff. And you were pretty happy with some of that data you found, weren't you?
Yeah, it's a phenomenal level of data detail. In a world of harvesting data from carriers through this methodology, there's A minus, B, C. Most carriers are in the B, C in terms of the amount of information that we can capture that would help the negotiation. I would solidly put you in an A minus. There's only one piece that I wish was a little bit more robust, but that's typically not found anyway. I've seen it only once in the whole country. So the other robot that we were able to develop with your assistance was the ability for there to be financial integrity to knowing that you're never paying a premium for someone that has already either waived off or that you're slow to pay someone or add someone on. This audit control functionality of having a robot do this answers one of the most basic questions people brought up, which was, am I comfortable releasing my private information to anybody? And the reality is, whether you call that robot R2D2 or C3PO, it is purely a robot that is interacting with this individual's data. And that's what I think also gives people kind of the comfort of knowing that they control the launch and release of that robot, or they have it on a scheduled basis where they don't have to push a button for it to literally play Pac-Man and go pick up those EOBs on their behalf. So we've tried to build it in such a way that you see in even the conversation that unfolded. This was a great way to kind of handle your thought process, was let the employees articulate all of their objections, let you hear all of their concerns, and then let you hear what would be sort of a logical answer to all of it. And the most fundamental fear that people have is Big Brother being not me, but you, using their private health information in any sort of hiring or firing decision. And I will assure you that the data that you will ever see will only be done on a de-identified basis, where it's not even a whiff of a chance that it's at risk of compromising. Did the termination have anything to do with the plan? Everything is firewalled for a reason, because we recognize that we're being given the trust of your employees so that we can create something better for your employees. And even my background is very pro figuring out with employees, if only you cooperated, we're going to be able to bring value to the table that either perpetuates the plan that you have, which in my opinion is not really sustainable in the absence of something that helps drive down the cost. So the appeal of how we go at this is we are dispatched by a district for the benefit of its employees and driving down the cost in such a way that it leaves less tension between the district and its employees as to limited dollars. How are you going to maintain wages and benefits? This is I guess the tie back of the robots. The robots just begin to build the arsenal that you lack in negotiations with your incumbent carrier/provider.
This concept seems great, and I buy into it, and it seems like a great long-term solution. A lot hinges on compliance from the teachers. In your experience, has that been an issue in other districts, getting the teachers to release their HIPAA data? Is it a tough
The answer is no, for the following reasons. Remember, they have to submit this claim to the secondary carrier, which is APL, and we are the administrator for the secondary carrier, APL. So the idea of there's no carrier in the world that is paying a claim blindly without data. Of course, they're going to have that data. The only real choice that the employee is facing here is, do you prefer to make this easier on yourself by letting it just automate, or do you prefer, under a typical HRA, which is why we call it a reinsured HRA concept, that you would have to submit to secondary the primary's EOB as proof of financial loss in order to have the other event trigger. So what we find is that people have a knee-jerk tendency to think that they need to rally around HIPAA, but when they realize that the very people that should be touching their HIPAA data are insurance carriers, claim payers, there's a breathing function of any insurance carrier that of course they're touching this data. And once people kind of get their minds around that, I've not seen anyone in this version of the model. I've never had any problem with it. What I will tell you is another version of it is that we look for employees to complete a health screening and have potentially a reward that's not being laid out on the table here. And the only time I've ever seen that was that they were concerned when we were doing an on-site blood test. Oddly, one or two people in my entire lifetime felt like that was the ability for us to map their DNA, and they feared that. We then moved to a model that says we're never going to touch your blood or even be in the room when it happens. We're only going to arrange that you go to your own doctor and get this, because all we want is the dialogue to start between you and your doctor. So from a degree of difficulty stuff, we're not even going to the point where I would ever get any friction with people. This is just a claim processing issue, and they generally don't have a problem with it. Wellness gets funny as to how people think about that.
Yeah, we're familiar with that. I think we're past all that with wellness. So
Yeah, actually, from what you described, you've proven the one thing that we've solved it with, which is if you fund enough dollars to an individual to complete wellness, everyone will get over it, and that's
It does help. One question is, and obviously we're looking at this two-carrier type method. Why American Public Life versus somebody else?
Okay. Depending on the state, American Public Life is actually a subsidiary or sister company to American Fidelity Life. And in the education world, American Fidelity is actually the largest market share player, bigger than an Aflac, bigger than a lot of names that may be more name brand familiar. For whatever reason,
Sure.
they've gone as a boutique at these school districts. So in the Egyptian Trust, what we had was about a 30-year history of working with American Fidelity originally. They know the risk inside and out because they've been insuring the risk of school teachers for a long time, and they simply have built the most integrated and most competitive product. There are other carriers that we have dealt with in other industries. So I've named Allstate, I've named State Farm, and the pattern is going to be, I'm going to start to name a bunch of auto insurance carriers, but what people forget is a long time ago, all these folks were also health insurance carriers. It's just that covering $5 million, $6 million, $7 million of risk was not their appetite. They wanted to deal with front-end risk of the size of an automobile, not of the size of $5 million of risk. So what exists out there are other alternatives. I would simply say that for the fact that the major likelihood is that American Fidelity has been at the leading edge of then developing reinsurance to potentially introduce you into the world of self-funding, and that isn't a necessity. It's simply the fact that there's enough momentum that they have with teachers, enough familiarity with the risk that is always going to be about price. They are the best price. Number one is what would be of greatest interest to you.
Sure.
But number two, they're the most flexible in design, that even for you to come up with things that you're able to accomplish uniquely in Baraboo, the ability to flex that insurance to take advantage of any what I'll call episodic bundle payment. We've talked about this before. I'll just simply say, in Rockford, which is not too far from you, is the Employers Coalition on Health, and that is really the other environment that we come from is coalitions of employers. And we were the developer of the black box for Prometheus, which is what gave rise to CMS's pricing methodology. Episodic care is about senior year. We're at freshman year, but senior year would be, can you imagine that in effect, the real insurance carrier may well be, it may well be that it's a cooperation with doctors and providers in the community being incentivized to actually get people better, which is what exactly Prometheus is all about. And instead, the current model is at least in the Dean Care, it should almost be working in that direction, except the problem is the rates that you're paying are suggesting it's not working. It suggests that they're getting a monopoly profit out of it due to the fact that your current rates look more like downtown Chicago than they look like a non-urban area in the United States. That's how your rates look right now, and that's kind of the premise of, ultimately, I suspect that I don't want to go to war with Dean Care, but I want to be in a strong enough negotiating position to say we have an alternative. Until you have an alternative, you have no negotiation. You will get an alternative out of having control of your data. That's a certainty.
Thank you.
Dan, seems like, well, the majority of folks here are on personnel, and they probably already know this, but how have we gotten here? How did you come to find secure, enroll, and vet them? And no offense, but how have we reached this
Sure.
point? And
Well, basically Lori gave me a list of things to accomplish that were impossible. And so,
But you did it.
so anyways, so I got to Jim through Randy Marking, Innovative Benefit Solutions out of Milwaukee. Randy has been a long time friend of the family, he's a long time friend of Baraboo, been in the health insurance business his whole life. We have had on again, off again conversations over the years about Baraboo on a lot of things. We actually had a meeting, Sean may remember this from the private sector, we actually got a bunch of employers in the room to try to do an employer coalition, similar to what Jim's talking about, and that was years ago. I mean, that's 10 years ago now. And getting all those people in the room and trying to get them to move off center off of what they're doing now we just didn't get any interest. Despite the fact that people complain, the number one complaint is not about their business insurance, except for Sean. The number one complaint is health insurance. It's not their auto or their work comp, or they complain about work comp, but that's not what people's problems are. Business owners' problems are the health insurance. They can't control these benefits. So when Lori delivered that, we got to 8.9. I called Randy and said, here's where we're at. What do you think? And so Randy has a relationship with Jim Baxter, and that's how they've done business together. And he goes, let's get Jim involved. Let's see what we can do. That started the process of our conversation. And then we gave them all the data that we could. IBS actually quoted a self-funded model for us, but the data that Dean gives us was not enough for Randy to feel comfortable yet going down that path. Okay? Because in essence, we felt like the risk, the way we had to price it, was too high for perhaps what the exposure really is. Okay?
The road
So,
wasn't plowed.
huh?
The road wasn't plowed.
The road was not plowed, as Jim pointed out. And so then we've gotten more involved with, obviously, day-to-day with Jim, because he's the one that's all these day-to-day things. But do you want to explain how much business you and Randy do together, just so they have a better understanding of what you guys do?
Yeah, and actually, I'd like to maybe even give you probably the most important differentiation is throughout the Midwest and out to the East Coast and even out to Arizona, the technology that my company developed, and I think that's the most important thing I'm going to leave you with, is we're actually a technology company. And that's an interesting twist in a world of insurance. And we're a unique technology company because of our ability to get these claims on an efficient basis is very much the only place in the country that has the ability to do it, and it's been proprietary to us for a number of years. We had originally been working with coalitions on it being more of a researcher's tool, and came over the course of time to realize it was better suited as a negotiator's tool. And at that point, that's when an organization you may or may not be familiar with is NJPA, National Joint Powers Alliance, out of Minnesota. If you're not, the footprint of NJPA is about 50,000 public sector employers across the country. So from a vetting standpoint, it's not just that Dan knows a guy out of Milwaukee who knows a guy out of Chicago. It's the fact that we've now been boosted into NJPA as the solution, the very solution that you're being deployed is the solution of what NJPA is beginning to roll out in a connection with some other technologies on what we expect will be a national basis. What we've argued is it makes much more sense to deal with it more as a Midwest project, which is where we've stayed focused over the last few years. So we're not a name that you should be recognizing. I always say that I'd rather be remember the commercial a long time ago, BASF. We just make it sound better. We're not the brand. We're just the engine behind everything. And that's the place I'd rather be. I'd rather not be waving it in the face of the insurance carrier that we're ganging up to attack. It's more I'd rather silently gather data and return at the point where the negotiations get relevant a year from now. So we do everything possible to not put this into an antagonistic relationship with a carrier. Therefore, we're not promoting it's all about secure enroll. We actually would rather it always be about the school district having a direct to provider relationship. The brand that's important is your brand, and what we are is at least vetted by the organization that is the procurement arm for 50,000 public sector employers in the country to recognize that what we have is fairly unique. So I think the only reason that we're really here isn't for any connection to anybody. It's because the only place in the world that you can get integration to happen on an automatic basis is in our technology, and that's kind of the only thing we want to be known for, is being the technologists that just make it run smoothly.
I have a question, and I guess it's fairly naive, but should we go down this road and in a year we've got data, we're ready to sit down at the table, we sit down with Dean and they freak out and they say, we can't meet or won't meet or just refuse to meet your prices, we don't need your employees. I guess that's really the fear. We don't need your employees. We won't bid. We won't serve your employees. Now we've got a city of Baraboo with all of the school district employees and no local place to go. Is that a possibility?
No.
Okay,
that has, and I'm open to all possibilities, but I will tell you that that possibility doesn't exist for one simple fact. Nobody's really that villainous in the healthcare world. They're just like every other business. They're built on this idea of an optimization equation that says we're going to make less when we're doing 65% of our work. We're going to try to make more when we're dealing with employer groups, and even every one of them would recognize that they would prefer to be doing more business with groups that have a $250 deductible 100% plan, because it costs them less to deliver their services. So this isn't an unfair negotiation. It's basically saying, I don't want to start the conversation guessing where their starter number is. I want to know where that starter number is.
Right.
And then I want to simply say, here's your choice. We could either be the $6,000 deductible that you're serving at the same discount, or we could be the $250. Don't you think that we deserve a discount differential? Because at least 50% of everything that they're servicing at a $6,000 deductible, they're selling off to a factorer and selling it for 70 cents or 60 cents on the dollar. Point of it being that you're actually helping drive down their costs by providing this rich benefit. And to not be afraid to sort of stand up and raise your voice a little bit to say, doesn't that deserve better terms than what you're giving everybody else out there in the market with inferior benefits to us? So it isn't really antagonistic. It's actually common sense that I think even along the way, for you to begin to have an opportunity early on to see a conversation start up with the local health providers in the community on a partnership that says, let's work towards encouraging compliance to care plan for our patients, because your ability to help them boost their numbers is actually how they get paid at Medicare. That there's reporting to CMS of all kinds of data. The more that they can have patients that are compliant to doctors' orders, that's of best interest to them as well. So this isn't a war. This is a mediation, and you've got something they want, they've got something you want. That's the difference between zero sum. We're going to figure out how to make it work for both.
This is a great accomplishment, how much this rate has gone down. Is Secure Enroll's fee baked into that 1.8% increase?
Yeah, because this is all a fully insured chassis. We're basically paid as the administrator by the carrier, American Public Life. So every carrier has a cost of doing business. We are the ward of APL in this story. So you're not paying us. We're being paid by the carrier to do the the heavy lifting of moving claims. So ultimately, APL is very efficient in this because by our robotics, they're able to operate at a much more efficient cost of operation than any other health plan, and that's largely because so much of the data is moving electronically. If you can imagine everything from eligibility, I commented about the robots. We've already finished the robot with Dan's assistance on the Dean Care for the employer sync. So everything's a cascade that the work was already done at Dean. You've already paid Dean for the work, and we're simply mirroring that data of eligibility then to this secondary carrier APL. So we can just imagine all of the costs that go away for them, everything from data entry to claims processing is all automated, and therefore it's the most kind of fuel efficient model that allows them to know for sure they're going to be able to beat the cost that Dean would have charged on that same risk. And that's a comfort that it's not a magic trick that the savings came from. It's driven by efficiencies and by ultimately kind of incentives that are built in towards gaining data intelligence that allow relevant alternatives for you to show up.
Jim, do you also pay your providers much faster than, let's say, Dean probably does?
Well, remember, we're secondary to Dean.
But I mean,
And,
in
yeah,
general.
in general, we would be, which is the next part of it. Dean is running a large block of business that comes in all shapes and sizes, and I will guarantee you, not too many of them are 250 deductible 100%. And I think you already know that. And that's kind of the tension in the air of, can we sustain something that really is unsustainable? The reality is, most of their stuff is taking longer to cycle through, especially under a POS where their providers aren't their own doctors. But what you will find is that you already paid the premium. There's no reason that it shouldn't be paid more expediently and leveraged for deeper discounts on your behalf. So the absolute answer is yes, especially when you get to sophomore year or junior year, when you may be entertaining options for self-funded reinsurers that would say your greatest strength is your deductible. Don't lose it, keep it, because you're actually going to get more value out of that card than you would think. And do one thing different. If you're going to pay it anyway, just pay it faster, because that's going to benefit you further. So all this is predicated on the idea that you just understand that you've already paid the fare for rich benefits, but you're not getting the dividends that the world is willing to give you back. It's just falling unused right now.
For us to reach that sophomore year, junior, senior, do we have to start bringing other people in to the same kind of program, other school districts? And is that some of the romance of this deal for you? Are we kind of like a beachhead? When you talk about your background and the folks you're doing business with, it seems like we're kind of small potatoes.
Well, here's the Egyptian Trust as an example. There's only so many school districts in a community. You are it in that community. And to the south of you sits the Egyptian Trust. And there's the point there being, I don't represent any reinsurance agenda, but what I will tell you is that the ability for you to consider even the possibility of partnering into other insurance programs that are owned by other school districts, the ability for the Egyptian Trust to come north starts by having kind of a deployment cell somewhere, and then trying to fill those pixels in. Right now, I will tell you, you go wherever there's a lack of competition. Our favorite place to land would be Anchorage, if I were so inclined, because it's wherever there's no competition, that's where we should be, because it's that much easier to immediately create basically these credits. And at that point, you just keep working in epicenter circles around your spike in the ground to say, at the point where Dean Care peters out is probably the overlap, and then you bump into Anthem or whoever it is else that you're going to bump up there against. But all of it is this idea of transparency. You can never get hurt by knowing the profitability of your carrier. And today, truthfully, you rely on them to tell you something that I don't believe you're getting the whole story on right now. But that's all that they're willing to give.
So if there's not any other questions, or we're finishing, I conveniently put together a recommendation that would work well for a motion to approve, if so, somebody is so moved to do so.
While my colleagues review the motion, this is something, I'm gonna make this about me. This we reviewed last year, but I would like it reviewed, I guess, before, any vote, and that is that, I am married to a dean care physician. And if that's, if there are issues, then I should recuse myself. I think last year, Laura, you even checked with the attorneys, and that's why I didn't bring it up earlier, because last year we got the go-ahead, we got the all clear. But, I guess I'd like to bring that up publicly, and if the recommendation is to recuse myself, I would, certainly.
Well, I guess my comment would be the fact that we have two board members who have recused themselves because of the potential for a conflict of interest, because of benefits that they're using that are going to be affected by maybe not a change today, but a change in the future that's a cascade of today's potential action, and the fact that we have a majority of the board if you do not vote. And I think based upon your bringing it up, you would probably have a comfort level if you did that, if you recused yourself. But as I said to Tim and said to Gary, I mean, that has to be a decision that you make. And the fact that you're pointing it out, I mean, obviously there is a potential for somebody to find some reason to claim there is a conflict of interest. Doesn't mean anybody will, but I think the board is in a position we're okay if you do not vote.
You do have quorum, you do have all, that's you.
Well, we are getting kind of thin.
I was gonna say, any other guys do this, I'm gonna make this decision by myself.
Nobody has to be anywhere in the next 5 minutes.
Oh, no, but I mean, I would still ask Lori to even though we take that vote, is to still review with Mike what Mo's status is on situations like this, such as this in the insurance, because obviously next year will come up, or a future discussion on our healthcare plan will come up again, to see where we really stand on it. Of course, I'm not the lawyer, and I'm not the legal counsel, but I can't see where this would be any more or less of a conflict than it was last year. So if you got the permission last year, my gut feeling would say you're probably okay still, but if the comfort level is no at this point, then certainly go with that, but I'd still say let's do that before we get into another thing like this next year, so.
Well, I don't think it was last year. It must have been when Crystal was here, because we didn't take an action on health insurance last year, did we, Al?
I think, well, the last time we did it was
So
3 years ago, because we had a
Yeah.
3-year deal with Dean,
At that time, then.
so, cause I don't remember that, no,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Well, are you in or are you out? Because I'm about to make a motion, so.
Well, because I'm gonna vote the way that I know I'm gonna vote, I'm gonna stay in, because I think I'll get into trouble, knowing how I vote.
all right.
You don't know.
You
Motion's
are-
gonna be.
Well, depending, I mean, I
Yeah,
know how I'll
I'm not ready to
react.
vote until I hear the motion.
Dan, you're saying part of the motion is you want to note that the current employees and retirees that are not age 65, that's the part you're talking
Well,
about?
the part that are 65 need to stay on the current 200, 400 one-card system. Okay? So they're gonna stay, there's like 5 people, 7 people that are over age 65. This chassis, the 2-card chassis, won't work for those retirees. So we have to keep the 200, 400 plan in place for those that are Medicare entitled, okay? there's not much dollars there.
I make a motion that we move our groups of employees and retirees that are not age 65 to option 3 that includes the point of service, and that we leave our Medicare eligible age 65 with the current existing group.
Is there a second to the motion?
I will second that.
Any discussion?
Thank you, Jim.
Hearing none. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank-
Thank
Jim,
you.
I'll touch base with you in the morning.
If I could say one thing,
Nope, you're done. No.
No, we'll let you talk.
I have no right in this kingdom to say anything about the idea of recusing. I actually prefer that you don't recuse, in the fact that the whole model is about kind of this wide open conversation. Having your ability to sit and even have the idea of any feedback loop. I just think your background is actually very useful to the board, and I think that I recognize that some might say that could be some conflict. I don't actually think that there's much of a conflict at all, because the whole idea is it takes a village, and all of you have some connection in the community. And the reality is, nothing about what we're doing is to be in a sealed jar. It's able to be in a wide open circumstance. So hopefully
I think the
we don't
conflict will
lose
come-
your insights, because I think you would actually have a great deal of insights having a family in this field of medicine to weigh in a bit on how do doctors actually think. That would be
Thank
of
you,
great
Jim.
use to us.
Thank you. The conflict will come at the company 4th of July party. Other than that,
I'd avoid it.
At home, I'm secure at home. I'm secure here. It's out of, there's another time for that.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr.
Thank
Baxter.
you.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks, Dan.
Also on our agenda, we have the potential renewal and discussion of the dental insurance. Who wants to handle that?
And that's just a 0% increase, but we act on these items typically together, so it would be great to have a motion to.
So would the
renew it.
motion then be to renew with our current provider at the rates that were provided, which is a 0% increase?
So moved.
Second.
You want to stay here? Any discussion? Sean, you must have something to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was thinking
Don't get me
offering them
started.
95 cents on the dollar.
If there's no discussion, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Those in favor?